We will call to order the July 20th meeting of the Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission, and we have minutes for the June 15th meeting. Are there corrections or additions to those minutes? If there are no corrections or additions, look for a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? The motion carries. The minutes are approved. First item on the agenda, we have a request for an extension on a preliminary plat. Mr. Hadley, you going to take that, or?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As you can see in your packet, you've got a copy of the Diamond Acres subdivision and the correspondence, the corresponding emails from the applicant to myself. What they're asking for is an extension, and kind of a short-term extension. I'd say probably they're looking for a 6-month extension into the winter. They are doing work. I know that they have been pursuing and moving forward on doing some design work for their replat. They haven't quite gotten there to the point where they need to be, to where they can come back before us. So I would recommend, from staff's point of view, to give a 6-month extension to the Diamond Acres replat.
Okay, Mr. Hadley, just to make sure we understand this, we have already approved
Yes.
the preliminary plat?
Yeah.
Okay.
And before they come in for final, they had to make certain progress and address certain things, and they haven't been able to do that yet.
And we have something in our ordinance that says that the approval expires after
Yeah,
a certain
it's good for
time.
1 year. Yep.
Okay. Okay, looks pretty straightforward. Anybody have questions on this request? Is there anything else we need to know about it?
Not really. Actually, the replat of that area, if those of you that are familiar with the Diamond Acres plat, it's a little different in configuration, and I think their configuration will help the flow. It might help the stormwater issues. I think we're trying to work on that with city engineering. So I mean, there's a number of issues that I think we're trying to resolve with this replat. So I think it's
Okay.
it's a good thing for all of us.
Okay. And I expect it may not be the last one of these that we see
Probably not.
in the coming months. Any comments or questions for Mr. Hadley? If not, we will look for a motion.
Make the motion to approve.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to extend the preliminary plat approval. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Hadley? And then we have a special use permit.
Yes, we have, Mr. Chairman, we have a special use permit, and it's an item that you heard, the Come and Go, in the Come and Go subdivision, and it was for a car sales and service center. The item was tabled, and that item was tabled to obtain more information and a more detailed site plan. And in the meantime, I think there's been some changes as far as who's interested in the property and where that's going. The applicant wanted to do a continuance, ongoing continuance of this application, and discussions with the city attorney. I think we're in agreement that we can't give a full-time tabling of this item. My suggestion, and city attorney I think agrees, is that if we give, say, a 6-month table, time certain, 6 months from this meeting to our meeting 6 months from now, that we could revisit it. And at that time, we'd have an option to either table it again or deny it or approve it based on that. Or if the applicant wants to just pull the application, it kind of puts us in a bad position if we just table an item indefinitely, because if someone showed up in the audience today that was interested in that particular application and we just tabled it and we didn't really give a time certain date when that application was going to come back in, they would literally have to come to every meeting just to see when that item was gonna be talked about again, and
Okay.
that way they would know. I mean, if someone's watching it and they're interested or whatever, they
Okay.
would know 6 months from now, that item would be discussed again and move forward. So I'd like to get, if the applicant wants to feed into that, that would be great. But I just think that's the best answer that we have from our side of the table as far
Okay.
as what we can do to help.
Any commissioners have any comments on this request? Seem to make sense. If commissioners have no comments, I suppose we should ask, who is representing? Mr. Soren?
Sean Sorn, Boundary Engineering. We are working on the special use permit for the client, and I believe we're fine with the 6 month. There are some questions with the franchisees that they're working with on stipulations on the lot, so we're trying to work through those details to make sure we don't get us locked in a corner that we can't meet their needs to.
And 6 months, do you think gives you enough time to?
It'll give us enough time to work through it. We may be back here for a continuance or something, but
Sure.
we'd certainly have an update at that point.
Okay, thank you. If there are no more comments, we should have a motion. I would assume the motion would table the special use permit application for 6 months. Does that sound like the right motion?
That sounds the correct motion, Mr. Chair.
Who would like to?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
We have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Okay, Mr. Hadley, we have some other business here. Do you want to introduce these topics?
I'm gonna let, I think the first item, and we moved him to the beginning so he wouldn't have to sit through our other discussions. I think he's happy about that. We have airport land use planning. It's a presentation that I think that the airport and then KLJ is representing them. What they are planning to do is incorporate their plan within our plan, long-range plan for land use in Stark County and City of Dickinson. And with that, I think that I'll just turn it over to him. I don't know all that much about the plan yet either, so we'll hear about it.
Sounds good. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Matt Nesbitt. I'm an airport planner with KLJ, and I'm working with the Airport Authority to develop an airport land use plan for the airport. And this kind of ties in with that airport master plan study that they recently completed that includes a future runway extension project. And so what we're hoping to accomplish today is just to kind of get this on your radar. You know, we're looking at preliminary thoughts on airport land use policies, and just want to kind of get the discussion going on the next steps beyond that too, including the zoning process that the Century Code lays out for airport land use policy. So at this point, I imagine you probably had a chance to look over the packet, at least briefly, but I'm more than happy to kind of just quick do an overview on what airport planning and airport land use policies typically cover. Feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions. So with that, just wanted to start out with, the main purpose of airport land use planning is obviously protect people on the ground, protect the flying public, then you also protect the usefulness of the airport too. If you had a cell phone tower or a structure that went up that was higher than it should have been, it might limit the instrument approaches for planes to come in, and they may have more difficulty in inclement weather getting in. So, those are some of the main issues that you look at, but another thing that's critical is federal funding is tied to meeting kind of a base standard for land use compatibility and protecting airports. And so right now, what's in place is fairly informal, and we're hoping through this process that we can get something put in place on the city and county level to further protect the airport and the investment made in that airport. And so with that, I can just kind of continue on to the typical land use policies you'll see. Often we'll have height restrictions for airports. And what they have are Part 77 imaginary surfaces, and this is pretty much standard for protecting airspace around airports. Your first map, it shows these surfaces here are kind of detailed on the smaller page. There's a cross section, and what you have is you'll see, you know, different slopes, like a 50-to-1 slope surface coming off runway ends for your precision instrument approaches. So from your primary runway, you'll have slightly less restrictive surfaces coming off your crosswind runway. This, what's called a horizontal surface in turquoise here, is a surface about 150 feet above the highest runway point. So these surfaces are all kind of built in to more or less give you a comfort level or a safety level that, you know, if these areas are clear, the assumption is that you won't usually have problems with your traffic pattern, your approaches coming into an airport, that type of thing. And so what, you know, the end result might be for that surface would be possibly some type of overlay district that would help protect from airspace and encroachment. And, you know, as far as the city jurisdiction, you know, on this map we've got the city limits and the ETA. And if you're asking, you know, well, roughly what height limits are we talking about? If you kind of look up over here where this horizontal surface meets this brown conical surface, you're all the way up to about 300 feet is what's allowable. You go even further up by Lake Patterson, I think I have scribbled down here at 600 feet would be the height limit. So it's not an overly restrictive airspace zoning is what I'm getting at here with that. So I mean, on your city zoning codes and stuff right now, it seems like most of your limits are at 40 or 60 feet, or maybe the commercial downtown doesn't have anything necessarily set in stone. But this would, you know, be a kind of something that's more formal, put in place to protect the airport. So it's, you know, we do have something in writing to help protect. Because, you know, one common misconception is that, well, you know, if there's an issue with airspace, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, will stop it. And that's not really the case. There might be insurance things that ride with getting FAA approval, but for the most part, it's on the local level where there's the actual teeth to prevent something from being constructed.
Matt, if I could add in there too, just for the sake of the commission, with our new process, our checklist that we have, we actually do a pretty good job now, I think, in notifying Kelly with all of the applications that we have in ETZ and the city, towers, what have you, like the one that just went to the community center. You know, they're given the opportunity to comment now, so this is just kind of a, this will embrace that and just kind of build it up a little bit from the standpoint of it will be part of our plan rather than just on a checklist and we send it to them for a comment. So developers coming in will know more about it then, instead of just being hit with it.
Exactly. I mean, the process you guys have had so far has worked well. You know, if going forward, if you see, you know, additional growth, you know, this will kind of help provide an extra level of safety to make sure that something isn't put in that shouldn't be.
You know, it wasn't too long ago, was it this board or was it county zoning that we approved a cell tower out on the west side of 22 down there? And I'm sure it falls within this turquoise, and I expect it's fine, but this will certainly be a help to staff, whether it's city or county.
Well, for normally, I think that we've always relied on FAA approval. Yeah. And maybe, and I think that for the most part, our planners have been in contact with the airport authority or with the board or with the airport itself, and making sure that everything fits.
Yeah, and it sounds like things have gone well, and that process, you know, could work satisfactory into the future too. This will just might also help give you some, you know, if somebody asks, well, why is this an issue? It might be helpful to point to this map and say, here's kind of what the FAA they use to determine if something could be a hazard to air navigation. You know, in a roundabout way, that's happening today, where airspace studies might come back and show that, but sometimes you have a situation too where airspace studies aren't required if they're below a certain elevation, but they still could impact instrument approaches. So this will kind of help shore that up too.
You maybe said it and I missed it, but is this effort something FAA will sign off on?
It's something that they don't officially take a stand on, but if you look on that first page of the airport land use planning overview sheet, included 2 grant assurances, and that's those strings attached to receiving federal funding. So the first one where they talk about assuring terminal airspace is protected, that more or less is covered by these surfaces on that first sheet. So
Okay.
they won't sign off necessarily on something, but what in a worst case scenario, what might happen on an airport is, let's say the federal government put in $20 million for a new project, and a month later somebody constructed a cell tower or apartment complex that more or less made the runway useless. There's an outside chance the FAA might come back and say, well, we would like our federal funds back because you didn't meet these grant assurance requirements. And that situation, I don't know if it's ever happened in real life, but that's kind of their argument, that you need to keep some type of zoning in place if you can, or make a reasonable effort. There are certain situations where it might not be possible, and I think what's in place right now would likely meet the grant assurance requirements, but going forward with this, then you're definitely handling and taking care of those grant assurance requirements.
Do we see this, do we see us ultimately doing a formal revision or addendum to our comprehensive plan?
I think that's what they're asking, is that we consider this to be part of our revised comprehensive plan.
What is what's the landowner involvement with this process?
With this process, there would be, before things are said and done, there would be at least 2 public hearings regarding this. There would be an airport zoning commission would be established, and that's something we met with the county planning and zoning June 30th to kind of just exactly what we're doing today, touch base with them. And there would be airport zoning commission that would just be temporary in nature, that would come together and formulate a plan and the recommended policies that would ultimately be turned into zoning if it makes it through the full process. And KLJ is the consultant for the airport. We have a grant in place to develop this land use compatibility plan, so we would be there to kind of help facilitate and draft the plan that would then have a public hearing on that draft plan for public input, and then there would be the usual public hearing before any type of zoning change would be put in place. And reaching out to, I would say at the public hearing, reaching out to landowners in the vicinity, or even, it wouldn't necessarily have to be at the public hearing format either. If the airport zoning commission feels that it's appropriate and beneficial to get additional landowner input through the process, that could certainly be the case too.
Matt, could you maybe address just what your thoughts are as far as putting together that commission? I know we've had different discussions on it, and I didn't hear what the county's view was on it.
Yeah, at the county planning and zoning meeting, and Stephen, you can correct me, or anybody who is there in attendance can correct me if I'm wrong, but we kind of mentioned that at some point to get through and have zoning adopted, there would need to be a planning or airport zoning commission that would do the plan, have the public hearing, and the initial thought would be that the airport authority itself, with some additional membership from the city and county level, whether it's planning, zoning, could form that commission with the hope that we would have kind of a consistent plan going from the city to the county level. If it was preferable, you could have 2 separate tracks where the city had their own airport zoning commission and the county had their own airport zoning commission. But in discussing with everybody, the thought would be to try to limit the amount of additional commissions and groups like that would take up volunteer time.
Was there a suggestion from the county level? Did they just want to have their planning commission address that, or?
I think if I remember right, the thought would be that at least a member or 2, possibly from the planning and zoning commission, could sit on that airport zoning commission. So you'd have representation from the city, county, and the airport authority. So we don't have if it was entirely consisted of airport authority members, there might be concern from the public or individuals that, well, the airport authority, obviously, they're wanting the most restrictive, onerous plan in place, so at least having, some representation on the city and county level would be very, very much appropriate for this. But feel free, Scott or
Steve, yeah.
Stephen or
Steve Josephson, city county planner, and, Commissioner Elkin, or, I don't know if Commissioner Jackson was at that meeting, but Commissioner Decker was there. The thing was that the Planning and Zoning Board was gonna wait, for a timetable, and I think the consensus was that they would find somebody from the county planning and zoning and, ask them to serve as part of that committee.
You're exactly
commission.
right, and we felt that the city should find somebody from within their own ranks to serve on that committee as well.
And after getting your input here today and with the county's input late June, we're going to circle back with the airport authority too, just to get their final buy-in and thoughts on how they feel the best way to set up an airport zoning commission would be.
I think the other thing too is that any meetings like that, staff would, county staff would certainly be involved, and
Yeah.
and city staff would be too, so.
Yep, definitely. And in case you're wondering what the other map is beside our airspace map, this would be land use restrictions or land use policy, specifically what on the ground would be allowable, not height related necessarily, but it goes to what would be common sense. You don't want anything too close to runway ends or anything sensitive to noise. We try to limit residential use or avoid residential use when you're really close to a runway. You don't want schools, stadiums, other places of public assembly where you'd have high concentration of people within certain areas. And what we've got for draft recommendations would be based on the California Land Use Planning Handbook. A lot of states go off it. It's based on accident potential, type of runways, type of airports you typically see, and it's not the end-all be-all. It's just kind of a starting point, but its policies are rooted in statistics and something that when you discuss it with somebody, it makes sense, and it doesn't feel as arbitrary as just deciding, well, this seems like a good stopping point for this. So this is kind of what our draft model is based on, and obviously as you get to areas with less accident potential, whatever restrictions you have on land use start to go away, to dissipate. So I don't know if you've had a chance to review that yet. If you have any questions, and like I said, it's definitely a work in progress. For some other airports we work with, right now they're based on oftentimes radius from runway ends, that type of thing. We've had cities, counties, airports that would prefer it to be broken down by quarter section, whatever in the end result would be more implementable. That's always a way forward too. So
it's interesting. A couple years ago, we had a developer proposing a multi-story tower on the west end of town. That I don't think any of us knew how serious that was, but it does fall within some of the shading here, and perhaps wouldn't have affected it in the end, but kind of interesting to notice that.
and as you get out to the purple and the blue that are a little further away from the airport, at that point your restrictions are less significant. It's more or less just trying to keep those large assemblies of people or anything that might be sensitive to noise where there'd be an impact. And as this goes through, feeling out what's reasonable and appropriate, that would be part of the Airport Zoning Commission task. If what we have in place is either too restrictive, or even in sometimes maybe might be decided, well, it's actually, we can make this more restrictive. We feel this might be too soft. We've got a great opportunity here because the airport, compared to a lot of other communities, is further outside of town. We want it to remain in its agricultural state, anyway. So maybe we look at, more aggressive policies. So it could go both ways when we're discussing it further.
So Matt,
Okay.
Matt, just to clarify that, what you envision is putting together this airport authority board, correct? And then they're gonna work through a plan that's acceptable for the county and the city, and then do some public outreach. But the actual public hearings would be through county planning commission and city planning commission, and then eventually city commission and board of commissioners, correct?
Yeah, close. There would be, the first public hearing would actually be the airport zoning commission, which would be the grouping of city, county, and airport authority. There would be the public hearing there on the draft plan. And on the draft plan, you know, if it's acceptable to everybody, KLJ would help do a lot of the legwork on that with input from the members. So there'd be a draft plan with, you know, a lot of the exhibits you see here and discussion. So there would be that public hearing. And then, I guess depending on the usual process, there might only need to be one additional one then for the respective planning and zoning commission, you know, where the output would be, well, we'd have this change in language to the zoning ordinance. You know, we'd be adding this airport overlay district, or, you know, however it would be appropriate. And so, and that's where, you know, possibly there could be a third instead of two. I guess that might be closer review on what's appropriate public input at that point.
And then Matt, just to add that this airport planning commission is just temporary. It's ad hoc, and after the process is over, it's gonna go away.
Correct. That would be the plan, that, you know, once it goes to the respective city and county ordinances, then it would be just the enforcement, the administration would just follow suit like any other overlay district or zoning district. If there were changes in the future to the overlay districts, then you might end up bringing back the airport zoning commission in some form or another, or it's possible at that point the Century Code might dictate a little bit, but it's possible that maybe it would just be handled by the planning and zoning commissions without needing to go back to an airport zoning commission.
Do you have some experience, I'm assuming you do have experience, I know that, experience in setting that board up, and then what's required? I guess I'd ask Attorney Ms. Kripe to weigh in, just to establish this board. What do we need to do, just to make sure we're doing our side of this as we're moving forward, as you're moving forward on your plan?
Sure, and yeah, Haley, chime in anytime if you want. Sorry, I mean, Ms. Kripe, I know Haley are here. She knows my little brother, so sorry for the informality there. But the Century Code, you know, it spells out the process for, or it more or less just states that an airport zoning commission will be established. The procedure for that, I'm not positive if they do dictate that in this section of the code. It might be, I guess, whatever standard for establishing a commission, whether it would be motions by the respective planning and zoning or city and county commissions. I could do further research, or I could definitely defer to whatever on the city and county legal representatives would state.
Likely because it's a multi-jurisdictional issue, the state Century Code would probably govern the creation of it, and then the board itself would have to adopt its own rules of procedure, much like this board has. There's some authority from the city, but then this board itself adopts its own rules for procedure and elects its own chair, vice chair, things like that. So there's probably going to be some overlap between the state code and then basically the bylaws or rules of procedure would probably dictate how the membership is appointed, whether the city appoints its representatives and then the county appoints its, and the airport authority would have its own authority to appoint its members, and then the internal rules of procedure would likely govern the actual process.
Okay. Any comments or questions? I'm sure that everybody would appreciate any reaction to the effort. I certainly thank you, not hearing any objections. It makes sense to do it, have the record straight on land use and everything that goes with it. Anything else, Mr. Hadley, on this item?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. Not unless you guys have any questions or concerns with some of the areas we're looking at, targeting.
Anything else?
Nothing further on my part other than if I have cards, business cards if it's easier, or if it's preferable, Walter and Stephen, you could, if you had any questions or concerns, they could forward it on to me, whatever you think is a better process for that.
Well, we'll look forward to the coming months and seeing this take place.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Hadley.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Next item, we've talked about a couple times. Commercially zoned district overlay within the city. You do have, got a map, small scale. There's a larger map there on the table. Please view that as you leave. It just shows a 400-foot in this smaller version, so it shows a more accurate 400-foot overlay for our commercial standards. In your packet, I also pulled up what other communities do in North Dakota. And what you'll find is there's some pretty strict, there's some strict interpretation. Watford City, basically everything. Minot has some exemptions. Bismarck, you know, I mean, you can look at, I underlined in there, I don't necessarily think that I need to go through all those, and I don't necessarily think that we need to have an answer on this today. I'm just trying to make sure that we're looking at our options, that we're going to make a decision that we can live with and embrace for 5 to 10 years of commercial development going through in Dickinson in the future here. Our discussion, I believe, last time basically included including the 400-foot, from 300-foot to 400-foot, and I think everybody was sort of on board with that. We were going to keep the 50% rule in there. And I just wanted to provide you some other information showing what other places do in North Dakota that actually do it. Now, it's surprising because there's only a small handful of places that actually address it. And I think the places that do address it, I think it's very noticeable that they actually do address it. And what I mean by that is the aesthetics and the feeling of that community when you're driving into their commercial districts, it's very obvious. You know, if you go in some of the new places in Bismarck, you go to some of the places, the downtown of Minot, if any of you have been there in the last year or two, they've done some major changes, and there are new developments on the outskirts of Minot. So I think that, you know, what we're trying to do here, I think is provide not only a realistic goal for commercial development, but also an identity. And part of that identity is ties with architectural guidelines, ties with urban forestry, ties with our decorative lighting. You know, in my opinion, like the decorative lighting, we've had a number of discussions on that the last number of months. We are still a small enough community that we can incorporate some decorative lighting throughout the city as we're doing different projects and as development happens, that when folks come to Dickinson, they're going to have a different feel. And it's going to be a feel no different. I mean, it's not anything like that they would get. You know, we use Fargo a lot as an example. We use Bismarck. You don't have those same feelings when you travel to those communities as a whole. Not talking about just the downtown core. I'm talking about the entire community. So when you get off the freeway in Fargo, you don't necessarily have a feeling that you're in Fargo. When you get off the freeway in Fargo, you could be anywhere. It really doesn't look any different than anywhere else. The identity that I think what we're trying to create is to tie in some continuity of architectural standards, the lighting. Honestly, you know, in working with Craig, and Craig's been very open to it, and jump in and tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that we're going to try to incorporate some of that decorative lighting where we can. As we're doing projects up by the interstate, we're going to try to incorporate some lighting, that decorative lighting that not necessarily is going to provide lighting per se, per state requirements and for traffic requirements that Craig's has to adhere to. But it's going to give that aesthetic entrance and feeling. And what we're trying to do also is all of those lights are going to have GFIs, so they will be able to handle banners, they will be able to handle Christmas lights on them, they will be able to, and I think you'll see that those, if you've ever been to a community that's done that, during the Christmas season, let's say, or even 4th of July. I mean, I used to live in a community that we probably had, and it was a resort community, but it had, it's only a community of about 3,000 people, 3,200 people. We probably had 400 of these decorative lights in a small community. Those were all lit up. 4th of July, you can imagine, red, white, and blue lights on 400 lights. It stands out. It also, you know, it gives you a little more character, and it gives you something to build too. It's what you focus on. And I think that's what I'm saying, that we need to make sure that we at least think about it, address it. You know, the lighting stuff I think is a given. I think everybody's embraced that. I don't know if there's really a discussion on that. The architectural standards is where we are, you know, and it's you know, if we're going to leave the 50% rule in, that's fine. The 400-foot boundary, are we okay with that? I just want to make sure that we're doing justice to it from our side of the table, so you guys can actually look at it and say, is this what we want in the community? And is this what our vision is for Dickinson for the next, you know, I mean, this is going to take a while. I mean, we're talking about the downtown. And, you know, it was mentioned that, you know, it's going to take a long time. It is going to take a long time. At $6,000 a pop, putting in 4 lights and 4 trees and on blocks, it's going to take a while to pull that off. Unless we do a large sewer water project, then we could probably jump on Craig's bandwagon and back and put some of those dollars from that project into those type of improvements. But until that happens, and I think, Craig, you're looking at the downtown area, but I don't know how much it really needs as far as infrastructure upgrades or improvements or what have you, but I think that would be a time that we could piggyback on that. But
So Walt, as to this ordinance, you've given us a summary this morning of the ordinance, but I didn't see anything in here. There are no specific revisions being recommended. Did I miss them in this document?
no, it's all we're discussing today. All that's in here are examples from other places.
Sure.
Because I think that's what we wanted to start with, was look at to make sure we're not the only ones that are doing this, but also figure out where we fit into this game, where we fit into what's comfortable for Dickinson. This is what's comfortable in the other areas that I looked at.
Okay. I guess what I'm wondering, and I'd like to know what the rest of this board thinks. Now, I understand we've got 2 new members, but beyond that, this is the 3rd or 4th time that we've talked about this.
My concern would be if it would affect, say, a certain franchise that wanted to come, and we have a certain standard, and they're unique in how they are set up, and this would prohibit them to keep that uniqueness, and that might, in the end, they say, okay, we can't look the way we look every other place, because franchise is one. You know, you look at Applebee's, all Applebee's look the same. And it could be whatever business. And they come in, they look at this, and they go, well, if we have to be 50% brick, but we're not 50% brick anywhere else in the world, would that take away from them coming here?
And I think, if I can jump in here, I'm just trying to move this along. I think the consensus answer to that would be that we aren't near that restrictive, that would be an issue. You know, for you two guys who weren't on the board, this was done at the height of the boom, when things were flying all over, and we just felt we had to get some control
Right.
over the gateways. And the discussion, if I could, my summary of the discussion in the last couple, 3 months has been two things. Do we increase the 300-foot corridor that we now have? And then secondly, are the specific requirements too restrictive or not? And we might have some differing opinions about that on the board. You know, I think staff, if I could speak for you guys, I think staff feels that we're okay in that regard. My whole point is that we've talked about it 3 or 4 times now. I really think we're to the point that if you guys have, excuse me, if you guys have some revisions that you think we should make, I think you should bring them to us, and we'll say yea or nay. And if not, I don't know if you're going to get more comment from us. Am I properly summarizing what the board thinks? I know we don't have unanimity, maybe,
Yeah,
but I think we've given comment.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I just look at this ordinance, or, you know, just reading through this. I mean, we've got 2 buildings that have been built on a corridor within the last year that do not meet these standards. Cornerstone Bank, the new steakhouse on States, and they're in corridors now.
And, okay, for the sake of discussion, why don't they meet it? What's the specific?
First of all, the steakhouse doesn't have any windows in it. This requires at least 20% windows on the facade sides.
Okay, so why, just, again, so we
I
can
mean,
understand.
we're not
why
even
wasn't that
following
ad-
it now is my question.
Why wasn't that addressed?
Can't say I'm not sure when that building permit was issued, to tell you the truth, but.
I mean, but this has been in place for.
No, I understand
For
that.
years.
But I don't know that, you know, this brings up the other part of the discussion that, that Stephen and I deal with on a daily basis, is that we don't really have a mechanism to review exteriors. We just really don't. I mean, and I know that there's been some discussion in the past about licensing or approval processes for commercial or residential type development. I mean, if you're in a corridor district, I agree that it should happen, but if we don't have a review process for that, it's tough to ensure that that happens. And
Okay, that's more an administrative thing.
right,
You know,
and there's a
us deciding
solution.
what the
Well,
policy
right.
is.
And I agree there. I look at that. I mean, we obviously follow all the building codes when we issue the
Right.
building permit.
Yep.
If this is our ordinance, then why aren't we following it now?
Yeah.
is
You
the
know,
question.
if commissioners, if I can interject, I review the site plans that come into the extraterritorial zone with, you know, that the city is responsible for. And the people who build buildings there do follow this, you know, we work with them, on that. I think if you go up 22, especially north of town, you'll see more of them where you've got this mixture. And for the most part, we found that number one, the developers who come in propose, in terms of the composition outside and the facade and so on. They'll propose that. They'll look and see the other buildings and propose it. And number two, it hasn't been an overwhelming expense for them. And also the way they'll design their buildings. You know, you'll see instead of the garage doors facing 22, they'll put them off to the side or in the rear and so on. So we've seen it. And the other thing too is staff has a certain amount of, depending upon the site, there is some flexibility within this also. But I see examples of this all over
Okay,
the city.
I think Mr. Schwint wants to
Leonard Schwint, building official for the city of Dickinson. All new buildings do go through our site plan committee. So the steakhouse did go through that, and it was approved. With, Mr. Josephin said, some flexibility as far as meeting those percentages. Changing what we have now, maybe we need to get a little stronger on enforcing what we have in plan, but making it stricter is going to be even harder to enforce, I believe.
And I don't, again, you guys got to jump in. I don't think anybody here has talked about making it stricter. We have talked about maybe expanding the width of the
Yeah.
corridor.
Mhm.
But I think there's concern that perhaps it's too strict or not flexible enough. And if it is, we need to react to that, I think. But
I don't disagree that we should have a uniqueness to the approach when you're driving down a boulevard or a street or whatever, that uniqueness to the city. But I also think it should allow the flexibility, like the steakhouse, to build the way they want to build. Because they're investing their money.
Exactly.
Be it whatever comes here. If we get a IHOP, IHOP's gonna look the way IHOP looks, no matter, because that's the way the franchises look.
I concur with Mr. Decker.
Yeah.
I have had people ask me already if they can come to the Board of Adjustment to ask for a variance not to follow these standards.
okay, but it sounds like we did do that with the steakhouse.
Yes,
So that's what we want, isn't it?
But not a variance.
not a variance. We did that as far as site plan.
My question is, what if Walter's not here? I mean, everybody's opinion's gonna change every 5 years or 10 years when somebody else is in that position.
Mm-hmm.
So how flexible, I mean, goes the flexibility? You
Yeah.
might think something looks better than I do.
Yeah, I understand.
The problem, I agree, that's why it is kind of critical that we have a list of options of things that you can do. Because then it isn't up to myself or someone else to come up with that. If you are doing one of those options, and IHOP, I guarantee you, when they come in, yes, all IHOPs look similar, but they aren't gonna be opposed to putting the minimal rock work on the bottom or whatever that
Right,
they would
and that's
have
what,
to
I
do.
agree,
They-
the sidewalks, the boulevard, the street, the trees on the sidewalks, that's, I think, immaterial to a franchise. But what's important to them is they keep their uniqueness or their branding. Buildings look like they look for a reason. There's a comfort level that everybody knows what an Applebee's looks like, everybody knows what a Burger King, McDonald's looks like, and they can just drive up and they identify it before they even see the sign or whatever. It's like, okay, that's a McDonald's, or that's a Applebee's. So I don't think we can restrict that, because that's their franchise, how they're gonna look. But what we can do is create this, like you said, lighting and sidewalk standard that people need to adhere to.
And I think that in the lion's share of the cases, we're not gonna have problems with
And-
I agree.
the kinds of entities you're talking about. I just can't imagine that we are.
and-
You know, I guess where I'm coming from is I feel like we're to a point that we're beating a horse here that is almost dead. And, you know, Jason has brought up things before. He's working with this stuff every day. We talked before about you guys getting together with him and looking at some of the specifics. I just think we're to the point that we need to not just bring it as a discussion topic anymore.
Sure.
Bring some specific revisions, and then we'll say yea or nay, and we'll maybe change it some more at the meeting. I don't know, am I?
No, I think you sound good, and, you know, in talking in these franchises that come in, they do have a specific design, but when you're building a franchise, they deal with different municipalities all the time. So they will have, when a restaurant, when they want to build this, they'll have 5 different options. One of them's going to fit. And I'm new here, but reading through this looks pretty flexible, and it looks, I like it. I do like, you know, what's here.
I think so too, but if we do need to tweak it, let's tweak it. Let's do it and move on.
Right. And the reason the reason that we're actually looking at it is because we're looking at a number of different portions of the ordinance now that it's not as busy. So when we are busy, that we actually are promoting things that we actually want to promote.
And that's good business.
That's
good.
That's why we're doing it. And yeah, I know we've beaten this to death, but I was a little reluctant on this particular item only because I want to make sure that it's a consensus, because it's very visible. This isn't a parking standard. This isn't, you know, I mean, this is something that's a very visible, important statement that we're going to make for Dickinson. This is the direction we're going. And that's why we've kind of been beating it into the ground.
Well, does anybody,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
My only other comment is just, it's the impartiality of it. I mean, if we're having ordinance that lays out what these buildings are supposed to do, I mean, all of a sudden, Joe Blow wants to build this building, and we let him do it the way he wants. And then the next guy wants to build this building. He said, well, that guy did it this way, and now we don't let him do it. Because we decide, you're not here, maybe Steve is deciding you're on vacation or something, or if we have an ordinance, I mean, isn't an ordinance kind of supposed to be set in stone, not have a bunch of flexibility in it?
Well, I guess that's a philosophical question. Do we want flexibility or not? Do we want to give our
Well,
staff,
I think we do, but I mean,
then we're risking some inconsistency.
exactly.
Hopefully, we don't get it, but I think if you have the flexibility,
We're already getting it, that's the issue I'm making.
But is
Yeah.
it what you want? I mean, that's the question. I guess that's, I agree with you 100%. Is what is transpiring on the ground now, whether it's 300 feet or 400 feet or whatever, is that what we want? That really is the question. And if it is, then that's great. Then we'll just look at doing the revisions that we're talking about, making the boundary wider and move on. So, and I agree, you know, it's tough to have, we could make some very strict, you know, this is what you'll have, but I'm not hearing that that's what we want. But if we keep it flexible, and you're right, if I'm gone 2 weeks and Stephen is doing a site plan review, yeah, his interpretation of things probably is a little different than mine.
I personally think that the people affected by this ordinance would want some flexibility. Having said that, we've talked about this before, and Jason has consistently brought up some issues with it, and I do think you guys should sit down with Jason, or anybody else that wants to sit down with you and tear those sections apart a little bit, and then let's move it forward.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I really feel that, Jason, you're a developer, and I think that what we need to do is have some of those developers and realtors involved in putting the final touches on this whole policy together. They're the ones who are heavily impacted.
I just look at it, I don't want to inhibit people from coming and investing in our community because we have a policy that we're not flexible or too restrictive. Because it
Okay,
might.
can you address Scott's concern? Has that happened? Have we ever had a situation that we've
Not since I've been here.
discouraged,
Everybody.
say a franchise outfit or anything?
Not that I'm aware of. We had a case of someone we were working with in terms of the windows. We're just having faux windows. They met their minimum in terms of clear, the transparent windows. And then you just put some faux windows on the outside, and that met the intent. That met the intent of the ordinance, and it wasn't costly.
Okay,
For them
now
to do
that issue
that.
is the same one Jason just brought up, so do we need a little tweaking to the ordinance to make people more comfortable with that? You don't have to answer me, but it's just an example of something
That was
we'll
just,
look at.
yeah, that was an example, and they were good with it. To get back to the thing about the franchise, I think a lot of the franchises know what's going to make their buildings look attractive. I think when this originally came out, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chairman Jackson, but I think there was a concern along 22 that it was going to turn into a wall of metal, with all the new buildings coming in. So the idea was to break up that pattern, but also provide some flexibility, to work so that it wasn't onerous, it wasn't prescriptive, and people could do, well, this is what we're going to come to you with. That was my
When
understanding.
this ordinance
of it.
was passed, everybody acknowledged that 90% of builders would be in compliance without even reading the ordinance.
Absolutely.
We're looking for the outliers, as with any ordinance or any law. You're looking for the outliers. Now, again, if we've got a piece that's not reasonable or not workable, let's fix it. But
But that was one example of, we weren't gonna make them put clear windows in, so they put faux windows in instead, and that wasn't very expensive. That wasn't expensive to them to do that.
Mr. Chairman, I think we have more of a parking issue for new commercial buildings than we have a structural issue. It seemed like Prairie Hills Mall, for example, that there's so many businesses in one area that you have to be really, really careful when you're driving in and out. So that one I have a bigger concern than franchises coming in and tweaking.
Yeah, I don't disagree, Commissioner. I think that the parking lot at the mall, Leonard's still here, he can address it, I believe, but there really isn't. We don't have a review process. They redid their entire parking lot, and honestly, I would have loved to have been involved with that, just because it doesn't meet our lighting, landscaping requirement. They did have a few curbed areas, and those areas were filled in with concrete, brown concrete. Well, it's not quite the same as vegetation. So I totally agree, but we don't have a mechanism to review that, and that's where it's all leading me to you have a, whether you call it a commercial development review approval, that could be free, and we have site planning, that's great, but site planning right now doesn't address an existing site that doesn't need a building permit, which they didn't need a building permit. So they just went and did what they wanted to. Now, the sandwich shop and the other little outbuilding, yes, obviously they had to go through some sort of a site plan review, and you can see they did landscaping, they did what's a little more formal.
Okay.
I would say that, we might need to include that somehow, if that's a concern, because right now, that just happens.
And that's somewhat of a digression, but if you guys think that we need to address that, bring it to us. Let's address it.
Well, that building's another perfect example of a building that doesn't comply.
The mall?
No, the Jimmy John's building that Jimmy John's is in, the facade faces the corridor and there's not a window in it. It's the back of the building, actually.
Yep.
Okay, and Jason makes a good point. If we're going to have these ordinances, we do have to have the ordinance.
Built within the last year and a half, 2 years probably. I'm not exactly sure, but.
Does anybody have any specific comments about the ordinance that they want to give the staff right now? Okay, if not, can I suggest that you guys go back and bring us an ordinance?
Yeah, we'll draft
Bring us
an updated version of our overlay corridor. I just wanted to make sure that we were.
And I think you should try to get a half hour with Jason if you can to brainstorm some of the things that he's concerned about. Because he is living it more than the rest of us. Anything else on this topic? Okay, you have one other item.
I'm actually, Mr. Chairman, the last item, we're actually going to pull and put on the August for discussion. There was a PowerPoint that we put together for the commission, and we're going to add some information and do some other, provide some other information and do that at the August meeting under discussion.
Okay,
So
is this intended to be a review of the comp plan? Is that what this is?
it's not a review from the standpoint of an amendment. It's a review of the comp plan of where we are, what we've done, what we've accomplished. And it
Okay.
includes capital improvement projects that
I
Craig,
think that's
you know,
really
is very
good,
involved in.
not
It's a
just
status.
because we have 2 new members, but really since the comp plan, probably a majority of us are new. Keep it as concise as you can if you can.
Commissioner Jackson, it's a status report.
Okay.
And then also, there are a number of, as we went through the policies and the comp plan, there are a number of them that had asked for action, in terms of zoning code amendments.
Okay.
So that'll be part of it,
If
too.
you could, I think it would be interesting to us, to me at least, put the land use plan up for 5 minutes. Just
Mhm.
5 minutes, and just kind of walk around the city and just remind us what we did with land use. So as we make these decisions, we've got that maybe a little bit more in our head.
Okay, that's part of the
But you're gonna-
presentation.
You're gonna delay this till next month?
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing? Okay. Before we adjourn, can I ask one other thing? I know I would like to get this stuff electronically. Okay. Because I'm not gonna keep this, and there's some I'd like to keep. But you're copying it all anyway, so it should be easy to scan it as you're copying it, shouldn't it? And that should be an easy thing. I don't know about the rest of you, but I would probably keep some of this if I had it electronically. I still think we need the paper in the meeting.
Mhm.
How do the rest of you feel?
Yes.
I would agree.
Yeah, I think, poor Brandy, digital, yes. So yes, we can,
I mean, tell us if you were adding a lot of work doing that. No, no, no.
You
No,
want
we
paper
still
copies
want
at the
paper.
meeting.
I think this board with maps and charts and everything, I think we've got to have paper copies here, or otherwise,
Right, at the meeting, yes.
the one question I'd have from that would be, do you want the paper copies at the meeting, or do you still want them delivered to you, or do you want just the electronic copy a week before?
I think,
With the digital, just.
Yeah, I would go
and then
electronic.
These here on the meeting.
Is that okay?
Yep.
And then just a
Okay, well,
paper
we'll
copy
see.
waiting for you here, that you can write on? Okay, Brandy, did you hear that? So it'll be digital, the week before the meeting, digital only to them, and then at the meeting, paper copy on the desk.
I just wanted to clarify, do you want it emailed to you, or do you want it like in a thumb drive, or what
Email.
would? Either.
Email.
Okay. Because I
You're gonna
know
be-
sometimes some of the documents are pretty big, so, and it bounces back.
well, let's try it a couple months.
Okay,
It has the attachments and it goes right to their website on each attachment, so you're not sending such a large file. It'll have the agenda and you click on each thing and it goes right into the,
okay.
so it wouldn't be
Yeah,
such a
that
large-
would work, or a
works
Dropbox
pretty
or
nice
something
that way.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be better.
Yeah, the city commission, we get everything through Dropbox, that type of.
Yeah, that might work better.
Sometimes they don't open, but
Well, yeah, set it
We'll
up.
work
so
it
it's-
out.
Set it up so it's easy for us to get it.
I'm getting so much paper that my
We'll
office
work
at
it
home
out.
looks like a Roman library after it was sacked, so.
Anybody else have anything for this meeting? Can we have a motion to adjourn? Do we have a
Second.
We are adjourned.
Thanks, Craig.